Bam.
This is Benjamin Sledge, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I love being able to talk to folks like us from our part of the fight. The one of the funny things about being a counterintelligence guy is we don't have a lot of material, and so we don't really. Maybe we have a vehicle, but maybe not. You know, maybe we have a container to hide stuff in, but we don't even have enough stuff to fill a container full of things. You know, and that's so the antithesis of what a military moves like, right? But we're so plug and play wherever we go. We just don't bring a lot of stuff. When we went to Bosnia, we went with 2 Humvees and a trailer, right? And that was to survive on our own wherever we went. Tents, everything was in there. Again, not a lot of stuff. So with that comes partnering. That's one of the things I learned in Bosnia was to find the civil affairs guys and to find the PSYOP guys, because they had a little bit of capacity to move around, but often not enough bodies, often not enough stuff. And so when you combined our powers and our missions, we were able to be pretty effective. And so I don't know if you've ever run anybody like me who leans on CA or PSYOPs or one of these other similar tasks enablers on the battlefield, but that's how I approached it. And have you had anybody like me approach you and say, hey, let's combine our skills to get out and go do things?
Oh, that was like all the time. Like it got so weird that while we were in Ramadi, we made friends with some dentists, and we were like, hey, do you guys want to go outside the wire with us? And they're like, yeah, man, like the dental assistant. And then the command like came down and like pee smacked him and was like, nah, that's ridiculous. Dentists in combat is absurd. So, but yeah, anybody who wanted to go out with us, we were always like, yeah, man, tag along our convoy, you're good to go. So we had like even the counter intel guys from like asymmetrical warfare do some clearing operations with us. They were always they always knew we were going outside the wire. So I mean, we were literally outside the wire every single day. And same thing, you know, we're those force multipliers that are able to get into the places that a lot of people can't and have that autonomy out there. But, you know, with the good comes the bad, because you can get hit a lot while you're outside the wire that many times.
Yeah. I mean, in particular, my job is dangerous because you're outside if you do it the way I do it, you're outside the wire. But also, if I've done my job, I'm known in town and I'm obvious about what I'm doing. If someone says, are you a spy? I say, yes. And if I ask you a question you don't like, don't answer it. So I'm open with all that stuff, right? And so that also makes me a target. You guys are out doing things that are a little bit more, I don't know, we'll just say on the surface, friendly, right? You guys are looking to create positive things. Do you feel like you guys get targeted for your presence beyond just the fact that you're a military unit outside the wire?
Yeah. So when we were doing civil affairs missions the first time in Afghanistan, we all had like bounties from like the Taliban on our head because we were well known in the area. Just because, you know, here's a great, for instance, we built girls' schools. So they hated that. And there were several times we'd build a school, they'd blow it up. And so that caused like a lot of animosity, especially with like the mullahs and the local tribal warlords who were very much set in like, you know, leave us alone. We don't want things to change. And effectively, what I love to tell people is I said, within the civil affairs mission, you either make a lot of friends or you get shot at a lot. So it depends on who likes you and who doesn't.
One of the things we discovered, and look, this is, everybody's got to understand, you know, when you've deployed as many times as I have or you have, we get better at this. And so when I say something, it's not hard and fast, because nothing in combat is hard and fast. There's just the rules change every day, every mission, every valley. And so these norms are norms, but you have to be willing to break that norm and do something else. One of the things we discovered was when you build a school for girls, for example, where we were, you're supposed to call it, first off, you go to the tribal elders and say, hey, we want to build a school for girls. Are you guys down with that? And if they say no, that's where the work begins. And you work on trying to figure that out. You don't just go build a fucking school. If they say, yeah, you know what, we're into that. What does that look like for you guys? How do we do this in a way that's acceptable to you? And by the way, we intend to call it the Mullah Omar School for Girls. And then they're like, oh, you motherfuckers, we can't say no to that. You know, and he was alive and in the area where we were working in Afghanistan when we kind of came across this discovery. Earlier than that, we were working in an area that was heavily influenced by Jay Shalmati, for everybody looking. And they would go out and hand out books And so we're like, we're just trying to do what Jam is doing, and you follow in their lead, just they're trying to help out kids with education. And that messaging through the PSYOP guys, through the CA guys, through the CI guy, we were able to put it on them to say no to the thing that all the parents wanted. They wanted more of that from Jay Shalmati. And so we're like, no, we're partnering with those guys. We're all giving out books. And then they had to say, no, we're not. We're damn it. Yes, we are. And so they had to adjust. And look, once you get the enemy to adjust, now you're playing a game. Now it's on us to adjust again and everything else. And that's the tricky part, is like, what's the next step in the dance, right? But that little twist, when you combine our three-headed expertise, Intel, PSYOPs, and CA, boy, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I think like that's the thing, that's where our expertise really comes in, because we're, in a sense, it always depends on how much training a civil affairs soldier has. Is many of us, are geopolitical experts to a degree. Like that's exactly the job that I went into after I got out of civil affairs. Was I moved over to a geopolitical think tank. It was the perfect segue for me into the civilian world. And the reality is you have to understand the culture, the background, like why, do you know why they've been fighting for thousands of years? Well, most infantry line soldiers don't care about that. And neither do commanders on the battle space. And that's where we can step in and go, sir, if you do this, you're liable to piss them off further. It's not that, your idea is a bad idea. It's just, this is their culture, and they don't understand it from the historical perspective. And you can create more enemies that way, or you can create, like exactly what you said, more friends to win the hearts and the minds of the people. So, it really depends on what the initiative is while we're there. So like for us, like in Ramadi, sometimes you just had to take back the city. So at that point, our job was to minimize civilian interference on the battlefield. We've got the interpreters. We know who's dirty. When I was working with Major Scott Huesing, who, helped co-host your show, when we were in Ramadi together, he pulled us on because he needed to know, okay, we're walking in this area of town. What areas are bad? Who's dirty? Where are choke points that we should avoid? And so we just briefed him on all that. And then we took, his platoons into the area, and then we were doing house to house. So it's a really, really fascinating aspect to it. And like I said, the CI guys came right with us because they were like, they knew that we had the relationships, and they're like, who should we talk to? And we're like, you want to talk to these guys because they're dirty. So,
yeah. And really, and if I'm doing my job, I take your entryway and your access, and then it's on me to build a new network, so that we're not working the same network, and so I'm trying to find out who the batterist motherfucker is, because if we can find the top warlord, now we can negotiate and get ourselves out of some trouble. It's way easier said than done, though, and because this is this space is a spherical liquid, and it moves around, and so you think you're in one spot, but then you come to realization that there's a whole other part of the bubble that you have no clue about. And so you need to spread nodes throughout this bubble. And none of us agree on how big the bubble is, how dangerous it is. Like none of us agree. And so we're all looking at these different realities. It's one of the things that I realized was I am trying to explain different realities to the fires guy who's stuck on camp, can't ever go out, and gets a lot of information from above that's been filtered and sent back down. I'm like, hey man, that's not how it is out there. Before we make these decisions, let me go out and talk to some boss men and see what they say. And if we're in alignment with those boss men, man, we can reduce threat in the area and maybe make some progress on the non-lethal side.
Right. And I think the shrewdest CI guys I worked with would come to our CMOCs. Those are our Civil Military Operations Center. And we set those up because, we're constantly blowing up everything in the city, or there's claims and, we got to pay that out. And they would get in there. And so they would wait until the days where we're like paying people, because people are happy when they get a fat stack of cash.
Yeah.
And so they would be like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And then from there, man, they would just weave in that network and people would just flip on guys. And honestly, when we were in Ramadi too, during the surge from 06 to 07, one of the most important things that happened was we had Captain Travis Patrick, who was the S5 for the civil affairs guy for First Armored Division under Colonel McFarland, who's Lieutenant General McFarland now. And what he did is he began flipping the tribal sheikhs in the area and funneling them contracts, and we just followed that progression and loved working with the guy. Sadly, he was killed in a catastrophic IED explosion. And but his dream like lived on, and we just took that mission, ran with it, returned the creature comforts, and flipped the sheikhs and warlords. And the CI guys were always meeting also with Sheikh Sattar, who was like the big dude in the area. So it's really interesting to me in so many ways how many of the force multipliers like really changed the scope of the battlefield. And a lot of times, you know, it was funny when we first got there. One of the craziest stories that we had was this Marine colonel told these Marines we were working with, "Yep, we're just going to drive down the middle of Route Michigan," which is permanently black. And for your listeners, permanently black means it has to be clear. There's just like a million IEDs on it. So they would clear it in the middle of the day. It was only clean for about, 15 minutes. And so they would drive, they were like, "Yep, we're going to go down the middle of Route Michigan and we're going to draw fire." And I was like, "That's a terrible idea." Like, why would you do that? So these Marines, they're telling us their first day, they're driving down Route Michigan in a bucket truck with sandbags on the bottom. And sure enough, they get blown up and ambushed. Like, and I'm like, all right, we are not doing that.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to be a lot more strategic in what we do. So,
And when you say these things, there's so much coded language between you and I, where there's entry points for conversations that people who haven't been in these kind of situations, they have no idea. And so I'll offer back to you, like when we say Route Michigan, you and I both know what we're talking about, because the military, just for everybody else watching, the military will rename all the streets, with primary streets at least, and then they'll call areas Sector Orange, Sector whatever. And so they'll make it so that you can quickly understand where you are in the battlefield. If you're going to go to the next level, you'll also know the Arabic names for these streets, so that when you're in town, or at least your interpreter, you brief your interpreter, "Hey, I want you to understand the main routes through town so that I can translate that into Route Michigan," And so when we are talking about these things, the training aspect, they never teach you this. They never teach you, hey, if you're an intel dude, you need to know all the Arabic names for all the places. You need to know what this is not Mosul Airfield. This is, whatever. And then across the street, it's not Merez, it's Leslani, right? And so you have to know all these different things so that you can communicate well when you're off the post. Another thing that we don't ever really get training on is to become, and I'll just use my profession, talk about your profession a second, to become a good tactical CI or HUMINT person, they're kind of the same thing, but we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that training course looks like. The training is it's infinitesimal compared to what you need. It's so tiny. We mentioned culture earlier. There's no viable professional cultural course that grows with your ability as your career goes up. It doesn't exist. And so when we say culture, we're all saying something different. There's no established doctrine. There's no established identifier that, hey, Pete's a cultural expert of the third order. We don't have that. Same thing with interpreters. We never learned professionally how to use interpreters, where we learn what an interpreter is, how they work, how we can adapt, and then actually get trained on us actually doing this kind of thing. We all think we know how to do it, but there's no professional course that you go to. And so it's all haphazard, and it's based in things that don't work. So we have all of these things. So I never got trained to use civil affairs and how we work together. I never got trained to go and see the PSYOP guys and go, "Hey, you have access." I never got trained to go see an infantry commander and say, "Hey, whenever you guys go out, you need me on your patrol because I'm going to write these reports. It's going to help you do your things." I had to learn all that on the fly. Why don't we have in our fields, right? PSYOPs, CA, CI. Why don't we have something that says this guy's got a gold CI badge? That means he's well vetted for tactical operations. Or why don't we have a CA guy that's like, "Man, I have been on 1,000 missions. I know everything about this job. Look, I know we have warrant officers, but those guys don't go out, right?" Mm-hmm. So why don't we have a more professional approach to these things that are so complex, they're so impossibly hard, and then so dangerous?
Well, I think during the global war on terror, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were afterthoughts. From what I'm seeing now inside the special operations community, as well as counterintelligence, there's a lot more emphasis. Like they're considering the civil affairs. I mean, civil affairs has branched out huge, especially at Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty, where they are having them now be in special mission units. They're working a lot with diplomats. They're kind of considering them like more tip of the spear this day and age. There's an entire selection process that they have to go through. Like everyone's like, it's funny now when I'm at different places, like if I'm at the gym or at jujitsu and I run into other vets, they're like, oh, what did you do? I was like, oh, I was a CA guy. And they're like, man, how did you pass selection? I was like, well, I was breathing. So, they needed bodies. Yeah. They needed meat for the beast, for the war machine. And it's funny, I've been able to train a lot of young guys to pass selection now because we have similar standards and everything to where, you're going to help out with Robin Sage for the Special Forces. You're going to go to the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school where you're going to learn everything that you need to. You're going to do land nav at Camp McCall, and we are land naving dudes. Like I am so good at land nav. And the reality is like once you kind of have that background, you can set the new guys up for a little bit of success to give them what they expect. But getting back to the question at hand, the reality is just I think we were ill prepared, and we assumed that what was going to happen was going to be like Desert Storm. We go in there, shock and awe, and we're like, wow, we did it. And civil affairs is just kind of going to be this, maybe we need them to set up a few things, pay off a few people. And instead, it kind of became the linchpin, really, of, counterinsurgency operations throughout the Iraq, Afghanistan, and everything. And once we realized we didn't know what we were doing, it really changed the mission. And I think once they went through the after action review, like looking at our longest running wars, they're like, oh man, we really should have capitalized on this. And instead they were like throwing guys from the IRR, which is initial ready reserve, which is, hey, we tap you if we need you. They were like from the Navy, and they're like, here's a crash course in CA. You're all CA guys now. That's literally who replaced us. And we're like, this is a disaster. So to your point, I think that they just didn't know and they didn't see the value at the time. They're like, and again, when you have an infantry commander in charge of the battle space, he's going to want to just blow stuff up typically. Yeah. And instead, now they're thinking more, and they call it LSCO, large scale combat operations. How do we get the civilians out of the way? How do we manage that? How do we work with diplomats? How do we, win the hearts and minds? How do we have, PSYOP do their propaganda and everything? How do we gather intelligence in ways that are meaningful? And I think that's really where we're headed. So I think they've realized the error that they had and why there wasn't an integration, because you and I both know there really wasn't. And now they're heading that direction. So I think there's been a good course correction.
Yeah, I think so. I just don't know. And I don't believe the system is designed to develop tactical proficiency, right? Because they'll run us through, say, NTC, right? And we go through the same scenario everybody else. Yeah, or JRTC or Tigerland or wherever it's going to be. And you go through and you're getting what somebody who's never deployed or hasn't deployed in our way, you're getting their best shot at a scripted thing. And you and I both, if they sat us down and said, okay, this infantry battalion is going to do pre-deployment training certification, and we want you guys to write something for your CI and CA teams, we're going to have a completely different scenario within the big scenario.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
And
it should be the CA and CA guys writing it.
Right. Yeah. It should be you and I writing this thing saying this is what it is. Because here's the reality of what happens is big exercises, they like to have a solution. And I submit that like you have to be fast and every day is different and you have to write and there is no solution. You're always just hustling, trying to get information to the top as fast as you can and trying to make a little bit of a difference every day. And 10 days later, you're like, oh, I know what happened on that day I was there, because the pieces slowly start to go together. They don't train us like that. They train us on, and then we won. And then we captured the flag. And you're like, captured the flag. Or, it's so predictable. Like the the
Or we
shape
got
with the
stopped
bomb.
for hours because of a turtle.
Oh, yeah, that's a real thing. Or yeah, or like, oh, you found a bomb. What are you gonna do now? Like, motherfucker, I'm gonna go do my job. I'm not gonna wait here for 4 hours for the bomb squad to show up, which is
Yeah.
exactly how we were trained at Tigerland. It's like, oh, every time you come to a revetment, every time you come to a ditch, you have to call bomb squad. And we're like, what? That's not how you do this, like you adapt, you overcome whatever obstacle is there, and you keep going. You can't sit on the road for 4 hours waiting for someone to show up to go, hey, that revetment's all clear, go ahead and proceed. Like that's not reality. And by the way, that's a million miles away from what we do. Like that's nothing to do with what we do.
Yeah. By the way, if you're just sitting there for a long period of time waiting for route clearance, you're going to get ambushed. So
yes. Yeah. I'm going to do is I'm going to get out and I'm going to go do my job. I'm going to find someone to talk to. And if there's no one around, I'm going to find someone to talk to, and I'm going to, because the time is in our line of work, time is too precious. It's too hard to be a small team. And you may have deployed as a single asset, augmenting something bigger, and certainly no more than 4 people when you deploy in one area. Right. And so there's always more work to do than there is time to do it.
Yeah, that's true. And the way that we work, civil affairs teams, we have civil affairs team Alpha and civil affairs team Bravo. So just like the special forces guys, they have ODAs and ODBs. Whereas they work in 12-man teams, we work in 4-man teams.
Right.
So it's a really fascinating way to work things. So we came in there with the company size of civil affairs guys, and each of us took over a part of the city, and that was our area to own. And so you were the experts in that specific area. And then obviously we all talked and passed information back and forth, but via, the CIPRNet and everything's secure internet protocol that you can look up if you guys are really interested in what it is. But it's interesting how it all just kind of comes into play. And I don't think the big army has really figured out how to incorporate all their force multipliers into, what we're trying to accomplish. Now, if we do, I think we're going to be better at war fighting.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there completely. I used to, when I worked at Fort Huachuca, by the way, everybody, Fort Huachuca is the spy school. So when you go there, there's always officers coming through the intel part of the spy school. And so they'd say, hey, Pete, you've deployed, you know how to use this computer system, go stand off in this field under a camouflage net, and you'll be a station that these lieutenants, sometimes captains, train at, and you'll teach them about your job and what you do. And so I'm like, okay, great. And keep in mind, when I'm doing this, among all the different stations, I have probably the most combat time. And so the lieutenants show up and they're like, oh, you're CI. What do we do? Where do we put you in the order of battle? And I'm like, I'm either in cafes behind you or in front of you guys. And they're like, no, don't you go by the tick 32? And I'm like, no, I'm not in the line. I'm forward, right? And so one of the missing pieces to what you just talked about is commanders don't know how to drive us. They don't know when to spot bullshit. They don't know when to spot an all-star. And so they get scared, and they have a captain in the 3 shop, or maybe it's a colonel at the brigade level who's in the 3 shop, and they're like, I don't know what you guys do. And again, we don't have a button, a badge, a hat, a tab that says this guy's a badass, right? And so we always have to prove ourselves. I know on my end of things, I spent over half of my time establishing bona fides with the American side of the equation, because if they didn't believe in what I was doing, I couldn't help them. I can go out and get all the best intel in the world, but I needed more access. I needed more help. I could always put 3 more people to work, even if they weren't doing what I was doing. Like, here's what I need you to do. I could put them all to work, but I could never get access to those people because everybody else had a job. And so that ability for a commander to know, like, here's how I'm going to deploy my CA, CI, and PSYOP asset. I'm going to send them out every day, and I'm going to figure out where they need to be. Or I'm going to have someone in my squad or my task force, somewhere is going to own that relationship. And these guys are going to be forward deployed and working. And I'm going to get a flow of information like I've never had in my life.
Yeah. And to give you an example of just like how they don't know how to use this, I wrote about this in my book, Where Cowards Go to Die. And basically, one of the things that we consistently said is look, if some other country came into America and destroyed your creature comforts, every single one of us is going to turn into insurgent, no matter what. Even the people that don't want to, that do want to work with, like, let's say it's the Chinese government. It'll never happen. But they come in, they take over a town or whatever. You take out their water, electricity, their trash, and their sewage. Oh my God, dude! If you did that to the American public, just from other Americans, we're gonna revolt against each other. Yeah. That's like what we would do, and that's effectively what we did in we're in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. Afghanistan was more tribal and mud huts and everything, but Iraq, that's like progress. You could see stopped like in the 1970s from like Saddam Hussein, but we took that out. And of course, like everybody started shooting at us. And so we went to the commanders and we said, look, the long-term solution here is we get the electricity running, we get, the water back up and running, we get sewage plant treatments, the water pumps, the whole 9 yards. And they were like, no, we need to build soccer fields because Iraq is fucking soccer fields. And so finally, I'm in there with one of the commanders of the battle space, and he wants a soccer field built. And I'm like, sir, so many soccer fields have been built here. Look at this one over here. It's where they dump trash now. No, they need soccer fields. It's going to make them happy. And so finally I looked at him and I said, sir, I will not do what's illegal just so that I can be a bullet point on your OER. And that was, I got tossed out of that meeting. I mean, the expletives that came out of that dude's mouth, and I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I stood up for what was right, because I was like, that's taxpayer dollars, that's not cool, and it doesn't help. So, we had to do some really like kind of backdoor shady stuff with like contractors, because the battle space commanders, they were just thinking about like the immediate, and we're like, how do we end this war? How do we get the people on our side? That was our goal. That was our mission. And I think for a lot of them, they were just still in the like, let's get some mentality. They're like, I want, my combat action ribbon, or I want my combat action badge, or, a CIB, your combat infantryman badge. And so because of that, like when we left, Ramadi had gone from the most violent city in all of Iraq. We had about 50 attacks on coalition forces every single day, to the most pacified and peaceful city in all of Iraq. And people were like, how did you do that? And the thing is we always point to it, all of our CA guys, we go, once we got 18 hours of consistent electricity running through the city, guess what happened? The shooting stopped.
People chilled out. Yeah.
They chilled out.
Yeah,
it's hot. I want AC too.
I know, man. I know. Let me I'm gonna put a picture up here.
I'm gonna shoot at you. Yeah.
And then I'm gonna tell my little story about electricity. So that's the network, right? That's home, and this is real. You've seen this.
It's real.
And this is how people got electricity in their lives. And there was gray market, black market electricity. And so I'm talking to this farmer, and this is it's just right around Carrata. Carrata is like a very high-end neighborhood. So right when that starts to turn into farm country again, talking to this farmer, and he said, you guys always ask about electricity, and I don't understand. You're America. Why didn't you guys just build a high tension power network throughout the entire nation? And he points to, he's like, I can scoop up my dirt and light it on fire. And he wasn't lying. And you've seen the yeah. And he's like, how is it that you guys haven't figured out how to get He's like, you want people to relax? You know what he said? It's hot. We don't have enough electricity. What it is on, we don't know how long it's on for, and we're always worried about it. And so it makes us on edge. And I'm like, just writing all this down, right? Because it's okay if you and I say it to ignore it, but when that farmer says it, and he is just speaking the crystal clear truth, he's like, well, you guys are dumb. He said, this is 2009. You've spent $1 trillion here, and there's no high tension electric grid going through this nation.
We could put high-speed internet in the whole country too. Like for all the money, we could have turned it into like the next like Qatar or UAE.
Yeah.
Like we could have easily done that. And instead we just hyperinflated the economy by throwing money at problems. Like it was insane. Like they were like,
Yeah.
pay this dude, $100,000. I go, none of that money is going to make it back into the, like,
Right.
you think about like the stimulus checks as far as everything. I was like, yeah, I'm going to take your free money. But
Right.
I've seen this play out. I watched it
Yeah.
happen in Iraq. I know exactly
That's
what happens.
Yeah.
You hyperinflate the economy. Look what happened. We inflated
Yeah.
the economy 10%.
So it's all crazy, and we're just talking about one little node of this, right? And I'll give you another thing that I firmly believe, and I don't know that coin doesn't work, but I know it didn't work when we did it. And one of the flaws was we were the insurgents. We toppled the government and tried to put a new one in. We were the insurgents, and yet we thought we were fighting a counterinsurgency. The hearts and minds weren't essential for us. We have to withstand that danger. It was essential for Jeroa or the new government of Iraq. And we weren't able to get people to go to the government and say, hey, there's a problem with my road. Why don't you fuckers come down here and lay down some asphalt? They would never do that. They would just go buy asphalt, or they would just drive around the hole in the road, or they would leave the dead body in the ditch because they're like, no one's going to come pick that thing up. And they were right, because the government wasn't part of the populace. And so we never, ever, ever, and so I'm going to tell a little story and let you go after that. We never got that. And so we would tell them what was going to happen, what we were going to build, all to make the American commander, the colonel, the full colonel, the general, feel like they had accomplished something and had a legacy, right? These pins and ribbons. And so I'm in this, I'm down south in the southern provinces, and I'm in this meeting, and I'm not new to I'm completely new to these guys, completely foreign. And they asked me to come into this one meeting because they were trying to decide if they were going to build the Freedom Tower or not. This is a go, no go meeting to the boss. And so the boss is not there, but this is the meeting to decide we're going to present this. And they're talking about this stupid fucking Freedom Tower. And I already know, I'm like, this is all bullshit. And so they've got their POAD there, the political advisor, and they're all like, yeah, maybe, yes, no. And I just raised my hand and I'm like, is this a meeting where we actually can talk about stuff? Or are we supposed to just say yes or no? And they're like, no, what do you think? And I'm like, has anyone asked the local governor what they need? What thing do they want this tower? Because I'm going to tell you what they want is simple: water that's clean and electricity. If you can give them those things, the government's going to be better off. And then I shut up, right? Because I dropped my truth grenade, and then I went to Chow. And then at Chow, all these majors and colonels come up and they're like, oh, thank God you said that. We've been trying to get this message in. So the people at the very tippity top, at division level and higher, if they don't get this stuff, how in the world are they going to understand it when hard dudes like us go out and say, hey, there's a problem down here at the squad or platoon level, and that we can't fix your brigade or division level problem because we're fucked because you guys don't know what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And it's everything you've said is correct. Like, I remember they painted T barriers to make the city look pretty, or they wanted to paint the Ramadi water tower like a soccer ball. And I'm like, that helps no one. Like that's right. Fluff, man. Like, and when I look at like the money that we just kind of blew over there, I was just like, man, like if the taxpayers knew what their dollars actually went towards, they'd have been pissed. And one of the stupidest things that we did to create the insurgency was fire the Iraqi army. Like, I mean, that was just a really bad call. Because think about it. You and I and most veterans that fought in the global war on terror, we have some type of pension, retirement, or disability or whatever. The Iraqis had the same. You had these Iraqi commanders and Iraqi troops who were equipped to fight a war, who had fought in the Iraq-Iran war, receiving disability and whatnot. And we said, you're fired, you get nothing. You just created an insurgency, and that's what happened. Created one overnight. And so we didn't really think about things critically at the high level that we should have. And we should have included like some of the generals that were part of CI, that were part of CA, that were part of PSYOP and the whole SWIT community, to really go, okay, how do we do this best? And I hope those are lessons learned from 20 years of combat, that they can go, man, if we can do this better, then one, we can save American lives. Two, we can save Iraqi and Afghan lives, and we'll be better for it. And then two, we don't impose like our style of democracy on them, because they just didn't want it. They were like, yeah, we like Sharia law, and we're like, we're not cool with that, but like that's their culture. Again, right? I'm not saying it's right, but that's their culture. And when you come in and you tell them their culture is whacked out, again, they're just gonna think we're backwards.
Yeah, they can say the same thing to us. Yeah. By the way, this is Benjamin Sledge. His book link is down below. You guys know what I always say: buy two and buddy read it, because you're listening to a guy who knows what it was like to be in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's not just no shit. There I was in a ditch. Like, there's so many more nuanced things. And so when I often talk about intel, I'm talking about, like, instead of looking for a needle in a haystack, I went one field over to where there's a field of needles. I was pulling up all this information for the commander, going, do you want to know about this stuff? You've got this ag team that's utterly failing you every day. Is that important to you? Your CA team is doing good things. They're not just painting the fucking water tower a soccer ball. Because you and I both know that shit, actually, people got talked into doing that. They're like, yes, sir, we're going to paint the soccer ball. And they're like, that absolutely worked. And no one ever checked their work, right? And so what I'm saying to you guys is buy this book. It's hella good. It's award-winning in terms of literary skill, and the story is great. So there it is down below, right there, Where Cowards Go to Die. I love that title. And do that and support Benjamin's work. All right. So I just talked about a lot of things that are true, though, right? So when you are talking to your peers, let's be a little bit hard on, I'll be hard on the CI guys too. When you hear someone who's deployed or hasn't deployed and they talk about things, what are the tells when you're like, this guy doesn't get it? Because I've met a lot of CI people that are well short of the standard of what it takes, and we're whiny. We want to go work at the embassy. We want to go work at some field office far abroad. But if the mission is get on your boots, get dirty, and work 20 hours a day, then that's what you fucking do. And we hate that. And we always want to stay on the camp. We're risk adverse, right? Because of the nature of our MOS. But so when I hear people talk about these things, they're like, oh, don't take my picture. Don't take my picture. I can't be identified. Like, get over yourself, dude. We got to get out. We got work to do. So what does that look like for CA guys?
CA, it's less on your Cat A teams and even Cat B. I would say it's at the brigade level. It's the things that come down. So civil affairs back in the day was very top heavy. So you just had like these colonels that were waiting to and lieutenant colonels that were just waiting to retire out. Yeah. But one of the things that happened was we got in a big kind of shouting match with like the brigade. So we had our brigade and then we had our company, and we were all going over to Iraq. They were going over like Camp Stryker, Baghdad, and other places. And so they were handling, the fun stuff, or the funds that we would need to come down to do the reconstruction and everything. I remember this full bird colonel stepped in, and he was like, so, because we're under orders from USASOC at the time, because civil affairs portions fall under the Special Operations Command. This colonel was like, why do they get all the new gear? Why don't we get new gear? And finally we had this staff sergeant like snap, and he goes, why do you need an M4 with the PEC-2 and an ACOG and like all the newest gear? He's like, so you can jerk off to it on a PowerPoint while you sit in an air conditioned office. Like it was, and you could hear like, it was one of those like kind of things. And so it was a big fight, like for a hot minute. It was like, and so finally, luckily we had a fantastic colonel. His name is Colonel Pennels. He's since passed away, but that dude, like, he stuck up for us. He goes, no, these are the guys that are on the ground doing the work. So they need the gear because they're going to be doing the war fighting. And so for us, a lot of times it's red tape at the top. It's the brigade level stuff that really, really just screws the guys on the ground within the civil affairs community. And the higher up it gets, once you get to like your sergeant majors and your colonels and above, it can just get wacky, man. Like they want weird stuff as opposed to listening to the guys on the ground. And sometimes it can even come in the form of the people that have to kind of stay more on base and are doing embassy stuff. They're like, oh, well, you don't need this or whatever. And so it creates hiccups and hangups for a lot of us that are going, no, we absolutely need to do this to win the war in the war effort. When you have good guys at the top, like Colonel Pennels, who really took care of us, then that's when the machine is well oiled and gets moving. So really it depends on who's in charge kind of like at those brigade levels, because otherwise I've been in bad situations where I was like, I ended up having to relieve 2 majors of command while on my tour because of just absolute incompetence, loss of trust, like shady stuff. And sadly, that's just the way that it goes. So that's where our problem lies in the civil affairs community.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And then one of the things is you can deploy and be awful at your job, but you have learned things. And so you're not going to find a CI person who's deployed 2 times who thinks they're bad at the job. But really, if your orientation is wrong the entire time, if you were in a unit that didn't understand how to use you and they kept you bound up, yeah, you deployed, but as you learn what it's like to be in multiple units and to ingratiate yourselves to people that don't want to allow you to do that, and as you get better at that and you get better at working on our side of the equation, man, your skills in the CI world rocket through the roof. But there's only so many dudes like me. There's just not that many of us because so this is just for the audience. There's a part of our field that's called a warrant officer, and that person's a technical expert. But they, like everybody else, they promote and they get higher and higher and further away from the battlefield. And let's face it, again, we don't want to work on combat stuff. We want to work on strategic, or at worst, what they call stractical, kind of a combination between tactical and strategic. And so they don't develop expertise horizontally. It's always vertically, right? And these are hyper smart people that all want to do a great job. Same thing in Sledge's field. Everybody wants to do a great job. Everybody reads the books. We all trying to understand these things, but there isn't a reward for just staying at the ground level and just becoming a world-class operator. So that I can go ingratiate myself with SEAL teams or CIA and their assets and all these different people. I can go up and be like, here's what I do. Here's where I get out of your way. I don't need anything from you guys. I just want to let you know I'm available, right? And I'm selling myself to them. And that takes years to do, especially because there's no program, there's no path. And the commander's like, who are you? And so I had to have a whole speech. I had to say to the new commander, be like, here's what I do. And and I'll shut up after this. I would be the person who had been there the longest, and the unit would often rotate over the top of me. So I knew what the new unit didn't know already. And I learned how to reduce their time so they'd be more combat effective, because they were completely lost when they were so lost when they got there. I couldn't even talk to them. They had no time to talk to me. They had no respect for me. I had to wait. And I would tell them, this is the time frame when you guys will get what I do. I'd like to shrink it to that, but I've not figured out how to get you guys to understand that. And so that understanding of multiple units in an area and how bad we are at retaining information and how much we repeat the same mistakes, that made me as more powerful than basically anybody for that entire deployment, because I was always ahead. I could predict the future because I'd seen the past.
Yeah. And the other thing too that the audience should know is there are some people that are terrible back home, and we call it garrison. That's like when you're in your uniform and everything else. But when they get to the battlefield, they are rock stars. We had this one guy whose nickname was the retarded monkey because he was always getting in trouble. He was just terrible, like stateside. But man, when he got in a wartime environment, that dude look out. He was fantastic. That dude ended up leaving Ramadi with the Bronze Star with Valor for like his actions and firefights and crazy stuff that he did and the way that he just stepped up to the plate. The minute he got home, he was back to doing dumb Joe stuff, like buying a Shelby Cobra and like financing it at like an 18% interest rate. And you're just like, oh, bro, no, you were so good there. And like, that's the thing you got to remember. It changes. Like wars specifically and overseas deployments really, I think, showcase the catalyst of like, does their character and integrity actually come out and shine during that time point? Or is it going to be, they're looking for that next promotion, they're looking for the next whatever it is. And that to me, I think is really, because again, like you said, some of the worst people I worked with had already deployed, and I was like, okay, great. You were overseas and you have this experience, but it doesn't mean that you're any good at your job.
Right.
And then there were other people who hadn't deployed that were just shined like during their first deployment. And I was like, man, these are the guys. So I always look out, I call them soft skills. Hard skills can be taught. Like I can teach people how to do CA. You could teach somebody how to do counterintelligence, but soft skills are harder, like kindness, integrity, virtue, stuff like that. They kind of comes naturally, like bravery and courage. And when you look for those in people, and I started realizing that when I was overseas. So when I got into the corporate world, that's what I started hiring for. I didn't look at like education or whatever or whatnot. I was like, I can teach them this stuff. I can teach them how to get to my level, but do they have the soft skills necessary to operate in the environment that I need them to.
Yeah. No, it's huge. And those skills aren't skills that I'll say the Army that they love and they train for. Like, how do you build trust? And by the way, both ways, again, with us and with them, right? If I can't get a warlord to trust me, then Pete's not a good CI agent, at least not a field agent. Might be good at ops, I might be good at analysis, but I need motherfuckers who can go out there, eat what needs to be eaten, say what needs to be said, get a guy during Ramadan to pass the bottle over and say, hey, we're drinking whiskey today. And I go, fuck yeah, you're right, we are, right? And then that gets you introduced to people. Those are the people, those are the skills that we need to identify through psych profiling and everything else, but also get some mentor training and take these guys out. Like, let's get you and me to Morocco. Right. We hate that though. We hate that. They're like, hey, not combat effective. I have done more training on how to throw a fucking grenade. I'm a counterintelligence guy than I've ever done on interpreter ops. Ask me which I've done more. Right. And I love to ask this question. So I'll ask you, in combat, have you fired more bullets or had more conversations?
Oh, fired, not fired. We had way more conversations.
Where's the bulk of your training?
Yeah, shooting.
Yeah,
shoot, move, communicate, kill. And again, I get it. It's like you want to live and everything else, and that's good. And unless you're a real door kicker, I think there should be both. But like, those conversations are absolutely necessary. And mentorship, just exactly like what you said. The only reason, because I talk about this, I was a jackass when I first was in. I was just, I was a young college dude, frat boy who just wanted to party, and the military kind of provided that lifestyle for me too. And so I was like, I was the fratty fun guy, the bro in the group. And I just did dumb stuff. And the only reason I think I turned out well and I was able to lead troops and eventually climb my way up the ladder is because I had a really solid NCO and a really solid couple NCOs who emulated what it was like and who took me under the wing and said, Sledge, we're going to mentor you. And kind of just beat that out of me. And if you don't have that, if you don't have a good backbone, like NCO core, you don't have a good officer core, you don't have the mentors that go, this is a guy that needs a little bit hand up. I need to work with him. Because you can identify the guys that are already killing it. They're going to go to the Ranger challenges and all the other drill sergeant of the year and whatever. Yeah, they're going to do that. You don't need to worry about them. It's the other guys. And if you can do that, you can find that they will really excel. And the more that we have those mentorship programs, and I think that's something that's really, really huge. I love what the military is doing now with like people getting out of the military and doing skill bridge and finding like how their jobs and military jobs can translate and giving them time to search for those jobs and be in high demand. I think they should do the same thing for mentoring while they're in now.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of money and get a ton of value on having mentors. You got to heavily vet the mentors, but that skill is essential. And I've asked you a zillion questions and kind of driven the conversation, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to let you kick the ball back at me a little bit. What do you have any questions or for me, or do you want to bring up any areas that you may be like, oh, let's talk about this? Because these kind of conversations are invaluable. If TRADOC would listen to this show, and they would be like, oh my gosh, we need to they could adjust, right? Because we're no shit dudes that went out and did these things and saw these problems, saw the wins and what they look like and how to build those as well.
Yeah. So when it comes to HUMIT, like one of the key things that I saw happen was you guys would brief commanders and then they wouldn't listen. To like the intelligence that you had gathered. Why was that? That was like crazy to me.
Yeah, because again, we're not trained to ingratiate ourselves to the command. The command doesn't owe me a fucking thing. I owe them everything. And so I've got to say, I owe you everything. I need access to the battlefield and then life support. And from there, you'll get what I do. And so I would tell commanders, like, you're not going to get what I do. It's going to take you about 3 weeks to see that I'm valuable. And then in 3 months, you're going to look at me and you're going to say, Pete, this is, you are number one force multiplier. We couldn't have done this without you. And anytime you want to talk to me, you come in and you have open access to sit on my couch. And I would tell them, your peers have told me to tell you this. So I learned the things to say. That's almost word for word what I would say to every new commander I got. And they're like, fine, I'll take that bet. I'll put you at, and also you're going to put me under a captain. It's the wrong spot for me. I should be advising you directly, but that's fine. Beyond that, it's on me to make sure
it seems like
that
it's lost in a telephone game. You know, if you're telling the captain, then yeah.
Well, here's how you fix the telephone game. So I can't be, this is what Lawrence from Arabia, this is what he did wrong. He stayed out too much. He didn't come back and back brief on the success he was having. It wasn't possible, but you have to find a way to do it. So I can't just be out every day. I have to also be in staff rooms. I have to also go to the sub meetings, and I have to go, and someone, not me, someone has to, and they have to create that link and say, hey, look, I'm writing reports. This is going to be hitting the commander's desk. I don't want you caught unaware. I want to make sure that, and then you've got to check up on it. You got to build an audience. And if you don't build that audience, then you'll never hear your words from your report coming out of the staff's mouths or the commander's mouth. I knew I was doing well when they would say such and such. I'm like, that's my sentence. I'm the one that gave them that information. Otherwise, I don't need to go on patrols. I'm useless. So it's either my work is impacting how they see things or it's not. And it doesn't mean that I'm always right, because sometimes I've got to adjust what they need, right? I've got a list. I don't ever need a list of they call a priority information requests, PRs. I don't ever need that list. I need to hear what the command is doing, where they're going to go, what they think they've done. And then in that fan are all of the things that I can give the command and the staff so that they can tune their machine. It's not my job to tell them what to do, but it is my job to tell them what we think happened. And that doesn't sound sexy, but I'll tell you what, there's not a commander that's ever said, Pete, what you're doing isn't working. They always go, Pete, I need more of you, right? Because I give them information they can't get anywhere else. If you don't do that as an intel collector, you're mission incapable. If the commander isn't saying, Pete, wherever I go, you're going to go because you're going to have full access to my control. I need to go to a meeting, but after that, it's your patrol. Where do you want to go? When you don't have that kind of relationship in a combat setting with a commander, then you haven't done your job. We don't train anybody to do this. You have to invent it. And again, that's where mentors come in.
Yeah, that's great. Let's shift gears here for a second, because you and I were just at MCON, which is this military convention for veterans military in Las Vegas. And so that's where we met through a buddy of ours. We had a great time, tons of fun, great dinner at the Golden Steer. We were killing it there. One of the things that I think is really, really important is, what do you think the biggest challenges are that the current modern veterans face in our society this day and age?
The job thing is huge, because if you're unmoored professionally, you only can lose so many more guy wires. And we already know we love to snip that relationship guy wire, and then now you're just flopping. And that's perilous for somebody. And if you lose that financial guy wire in your life, you don't know what's going to happen, right? And so we struggle to transition stability. And one of the things is we put all of the weight on the veteran. Hey, Apple hires veterans. Okay, great. What's the path? Well, you talk to Bob. You talk to Bob, and Bob's like, oh, listen, I don't have any control over that. And you're like, oh, okay. And so you pick these companies you want to try to work for, and your resume, your skills, and all that. It's all in alignment from your point of view. And you get nada, you get bupkis, and you're like, where am I supposed to go? How do I find work? So some veterans find work. Hilton will tell you, oh, we hired all these veterans. But if you went through the process through their little veteran portal, this is 10 years ago, it was bullshit. It was bullshit. Like, I could put my job in, you could put your job in, and be like, you could be security. Like, you think I just do security with all the things I do? That's as valuable, So we put it all on the veteran to figure this thing out. And it's like, oh, well, your resume is not good enough. Like, I went to a veteran place that helps with resumes, or whatever it is, right? Oh, your interview skills. No, I didn't get any interviews. No one talked to me because there's this robot that puts a fence between me and a conversation. So I'd love to screw up at interviews. I can't get any, right? So I've seen this over and over and over again, where there's this assumption that the veteran sucks at getting a job, when really we need someone to take the intention of the corporation and that veteran and just blast a tunnel between there, so that when a veteran resume hits, it's just flagged. Bam, we're going to talk to this person. Even if we direct them in another direction, we're going to talk to them, so that we don't just ignore them. And look, that's making veterans extra special. I get all that, but that's what it takes. Like, hey, we're going to talk to these guys as much as we can afford to do it, and figure out where they're going to be in our organization. And not all of them are going to be comfortable for us, but they don't think in that way because we just look at the veteran and go, oh, your resume is not good enough. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard that. Like, you haven't even seen my resume. The other thing is that happens is you get out and they're like, oh, you're overqualified for everything here. And I'm like, I know. Yeah. What about that job that I'm qualified for? Like, oh, you're not qualified for that. Like, so I'm simultaneously under and overqualified. I've had that conversation a number of times. Salesforce being one of them. Yeah, we love veterans. Okay, great. If I start at the bottom with your program and I work externally from you guys, you love me. But if I want to get a job there, you guys didn't have one for me. And so this happens all of the time.
Yeah, it's true. And I think one of the other podcasts has brought this up. It was either Sean Ryan or one of those, where they've said basically the only people that have been in high demand because they have so much money flowing into these nonprofits are all the special operators, you know? And it's like, what about your regular dude? Like, where's his job? Because like all my friends that got out of 10th Special Forces, they got jobs immediately. Like, it was crazy. Right. But like I know guys that are they're just good dudes. They were ground pounders or whatever, or they have skills, and it's just they're passed over. The other thing, you know, we talked about this while we were at MCon. So you know, I do book writing services and coaching for veterans, military, first responders. Yes, at Solid Copy Media, and so that we really believe that veterans have a story that needs to be told because it's less than 1% of us. Like you look every single day, there's a new romance novel coming out. There's a new spy thriller. There's a new business book or whatever. But veterans, like, there's not really new ones. Like, and those stories do need to be told because they're being lost to the annals of history. And everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a different angle. But one of the things that happened to us recently is we acquired a book. It's Tyler Gray's book. Who's he was originally with Delta Force or CAG, Combat Applications Group. Almost lost his arm in Slaughter City, and then he went on to become an actor at SEAL Team. And I was reading his book, and he really put into words what I had been training other entities because I have my certifications like crisis response, trauma care, suicide prevention, evidence-based management of suicidal patients. And you see a lot of veterans that struggle when they get out of the military. But a lot of them aren't even combat veterans. They just assume it's combat that's making them struggle. And that's not really the case. Right. And so I was teaching at Colorado State University at one of their master's level programs, and I called it transition disorders. Well, Tyler really put it into words. He calls it a chaos addiction. So think about all of us as no matter what you go through the military, you're taught to be calm under pressure. Drill sergeants yelling at you, all this other stuff, you know, and you become used to a very chaotic environment where whether it's somebody yelling at you, you know, your NCO initially, or you're having to do things a million miles an hour or get, you know, even like a payload up to, you know, a C-130 or missiles or riggers or anything. It's a chaotic environment. You're constantly living under this like go, 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 go. And then you get out and everything slows way down. And you're like everybody. And so you're so used to the chaos that when you get out, you kind of have this like transition disorder thing to where you're like, I don't know how to be peaceful in a peaceful environment because all I've known is just craziness. And my wife has even brought this up with me. She's like, you just can't sit still. You always have to have something going. I'm like, I know, I get anxious. I have legit anxiety if I'm not doing something, a project or something. And I think like that's the big thing that our veterans need to learn, like how to live at peace, you know? How do we learn to like ourselves and be ourselves outside of a chaotic environment?
Yeah. We tend to also, because we focus on threats so much, we tend to believe there's threat around every corner. You know, I've been asked by a number of veterans, you know, as I live in California, like, do you carry a gun everywhere you go? And I'm like, no, I live in Orange County, man. And even if I do go somewhere, like, let's say I go to Bakersfield, it's just not that dangerous. You know, look, I'm not looking for trouble either, right? But we have this belief because we've looked for threat. That's one of the reasons why I didn't focus on threat when I did my work. Now, sure, look, I'm always aware of it, but if I can deflate any way at all. So if someone came to me and said, Mr. Pete, there's going to be a bombing, I'd point to the guy over there who had the uniform on. Back, that guy right there is the guy that loves that information. I'm trying to get to know people, and I would push that threat stuff off to the regular part of the Army because I didn't need that. I didn't want to be the guy that got that. But I learned this from my warrant officer. He was in Somalia, and word got around that they collected up bombs, and so kids started running up to their Humvee with bombs in their hands. And I'm like, I don't know. And that sounds like a good outcome, because you're taking all these weapons off the battlefield and then you're paying people for them. But what happened is people come running at them with things that explode, and they're like, all the time. It's just soft-sided Humvees, right? And so you learn that I learned that threat was damaging to us. And then the other thing I want to say about what you just talked about, most of my PTSD was realized when I became obsolete to the modern world. Like I was just 6 months ago advising brigade commanders and being called in by Afghan elders, like, help us understand this thing. I was hyper important. I'm like, surely I'll be able to find a job. I couldn't even get an interview, right? And again, I know so many people with the same kind of story. And so I had no money. Eventually you burn through all your money. I had no money. My personal life was a mess because I had no money and I had no good relationships. Everything was toxic. And then I couldn't get professional mooring. And I didn't want to work in the combat world anymore. Sure, I could have gone overseas again and used up years of my life, but I realized how much I was missing because I'd done it all. And just to simply get a job where I could get paid for my skills, it proved to be impossible. And that's infuriating. It's insanity creating in someone like us who's like, I'm just going to outwork this problem. Okay, that didn't work. I'm going to outsubtle this problem. I'm going to out-network this problem. And there's never a resolution. Man, you know what? I'm just going to go make it on my own and get a lot of therapy and try to figure out how to calm myself down, because the calming thing is huge, and realize that my first response, because of all my combat time, my first response is often not the correct one. And I have to slow down and let my full self arrive and not just flash into anger, because I'm not an angry dude. But boy, I was angry for the last 10 years. I was angry a lot. I still get angry sometimes, but I know it's like a storm. And within that, me and Rudy talked about this. Rudy Reyes, who's been on the show before, both of us have suicidal ideation all the time, every day for me, right? I'm not going to act on it today. It's under control. But that's because of a lot of work focused specifically on how do I get me better? Because getting a job I can't do, but I can work on my own mental health well-being. And that's a big thing, to have the humility to say, I am broken. I have this thing. It doesn't appear to be repairable. It just appears to be manageable so far. And who knows, like if my ability to manage it degrades, then I get into danger, and that's a real thing.
That's the denouement of my book, kind of the ending, the core ideology, because I say, a lot of the modern veteran resembles the first Rambo. Like at the end of the movie where Sam Troutman comes in and Rambo's holed up, and he goes on this rant. He was like, I used to be able to drive $1 million equipment, do all this stuff, Now I can't even hold down an effing job washing cars. That's the plight of the modern veteran. Like he was prophetic in that. And that was such, like when I watched that again, it just hit. And the thing that for me that I realized too, and part of really why I named my book Where Cowards Go to Die, is I realized that there are really just two paths in life. And both of them lead to, at some point, either succumbing to a cowardice or overcoming that cowardice. And the cowardice that lurks in the human heart says, stay stuck, don't get better, don't work on yourself. And when you do that, you'll die as a coward because you never spent the time working on it. But if you do want to get better, if you're putting in the work to get better, to grow, to evolve, and I like to call it post-traumatic growth, then that inner cowardice has to die. Either way, a coward dies in the end. Right. But you get to choose. And ultimately, that's the one thing that we have, our ability to choose how we're going to respond to a situation that is going to allow us to either die as a coward or thrive afterwards and kill the inner cowardice.
Yeah, that pain, that's weakness leaving your body, right? It's that thing.
And fighting fire demons, the greatest ad of all time. Bring that one back. Every Gen Z kid will just be lined up in Marine Corps recruiting office.
What else do you want to get into?
Like
Otherwise,
fire demons.
I know. Wow, with a sword? Okay,
I know.
I know. It's a great ad. It's a great ad. What else do you want to get into?
I feel like we've covered a lot of it. Like, you know, I think the only other thing, you know, that I would tell people is just, you know, pick up my book. That's a selfish plug, but you know, my synopsis really is just, I think what's happened, if we're going to talk a little bit about solid copy media and just even my own work and why I want veterans to tell their stories is, and why I think it's important, you know, for people here to hear your story and all these other veterans that come on these podcasts is, I didn't never talk about my time overseas until like 2016. Like I literally came home and shut up. I was like, nope, not going to talk about this. Nobody wants to hear about this. And a lot of it had to do with like the way that, you know, I began telling a story and I could see civilians were uncomfortable. And I was like, this is why my granddad didn't talk about things. And so out of that, I ended up writing this like viral article in 2016 where it was the first time I had talked about my time overseas, because one of my buddies that I had deployed with started like a WordPress blog, like with like maps and everything, documenting his time in Ramadi. And I was like, dude, why'd you do that? And he's like, man, if something ever happens to me, I want my kids to know like what was what. And I was like, man, that's really brave. And so I wrote that article. It blew up. I went to one of my editors and I was having some writer's block. And I was like, hey, do you have any ideas about like what I should write about? She's like, oh, we love your war stuff. And I was like, I don't write about that. I don't talk about that. I don't do anything with that. Like literally, I remember one time, and this is in the book, I was having coffee with one of my buddies. And he goes, Sledge, I've known you for like 10 years now, man. He goes, I know you served overseas. I've seen like your award plaques in your hallway. He goes, aside from that, I don't know anything you did. And I was like, oh, that's a great point. That's a great point. And so she said, so my editor said, it's a travesty you won't talk about this. And I was like, how so? And she was like, look, you're part of the smallest minority in the United States. Less than 1% of you is served. Like that's from World War II to now, to the longest running wars. And she goes, we need to hear the stories of humanity, complexity, and barbarity so that one, we can avoid wars, but also understand like what you guys have been through so we can support you better. And she goes, instead, you guys are taking the coward's way out and not talking about it. And that's the travesty. And I was like, man, I think she's right. And so I just started, coward. And helped formulate my book, you know? I thank her. She's the first person I thank in my acknowledgments of the book because she really did. She pushed me to write it. I love it. And so out of that, I think for me, it's just so vital that those stories get out there. But the problem is the book publishing industry right now is overshadowed again by all the cool guys. And there's nothing wrong with any of them. I love these guys. I've been on their podcast, you know, from Mike Britland, who's a Navy SEAL, to you know, Marcus Luttrell, who's a Navy SEAL. Like the joke is you're a Navy SEAL, you get a book deal. You know? Right. And like they're kind of the new hype, you know, back in the 90s and stuff. It was the Army Rangers and because of Black Hawk Down and the Battle of Mogadishu. But the thing is 20 years of war, longest running wars in U.S. history. And there's only a handful of books out there which to me is absolutely bonkers. And it's focusing in on single battles or, you know, in a single event, whether it was the assassination of Osama bin Laden or Operation Red Wings. And those are all cool events, but that doesn't encapsulate your average veteran story. That's why I say these stories need to be told. And so within my own book, I was like, what would it look like if I just came at it from the perspective of I'm a guy who got stuck in a war by dumb luck, and most other veterans can relate to that. And I think there's a lot of healing that comes out of that because I've just had so many vets contact me and say, you know, your book put into words everything that I've wanted to say and say to my family, but haven't been able to find the right words. And there are other vets out there who have those words and they need those stories to be told. And so I think that's the thing that's holding us back is like we have a small amount of podcasts. We have some cool stuff that's going on in the community, but we need to amplify those voices because they just really aren't being told right now. And I would love to hear more of them. And I don't know what you think about that, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
There's a lot of books on our war. I've talked to a lot of guys about it, and they're all incredible. That's just the bottom line, right? So it sounds like I'm going to feel like it's oversaturated, but it's not. And we still tell, and they're not all done telling stories about World War II. We've forgotten.
Yeah,
about
you know.
Korean War, you know.
Oh yeah, I would love some Korean War books. Like we just
right. And so we should continue to write, even though there's a lot of them, and they may not all do well because they can't. But yeah, like look, I've got at least 2 books in me, at least 2, and that's the nonfiction side. Now imagine if I tell the fiction stories that are in my head, you know. And I don't know if I'm meant to be an author. I do write, right? But it's like I can swim, but am I a swimmer? Well, I don't know. You know, I've driven race cars. Am I a race car driver? I don't know. So I don't know if I'm a novel author or a biography author or not. But I can get some help. And I can go down to this link below, Solid Copy Media. These folks will guide you and help you figure out any of these media things. Matter of fact, I'm going to be joining you guys to offer my expertise on podcasting, because this is another way of storytelling. And if I can help someone get launched, and more importantly, having like, fuck your idea. I don't care about your idea. Can you get in the pool every day and swim? Can you do this every day and make the podcast show up so that you can turn it into something? Because the reality is nobody knows what their podcast is going to be. It becomes something, and sometimes it becomes exactly what you want it to be. But like life, that's just too randomized. And so that's what I'd love to help people who wanted to start podcasting and knock on the door, like, how do I get some of Pete's got? Because look, 2,000 episodes. I know how to do this. I know how to keep doing it. And you can guide you towards how to make it even better or more profitable or more influential. But first, you got to be able to get across the pool 25 times without getting out of breath. And that's I use swimming as an example, because everybody I'm talking to right now, most of them can't swim a mile straight, right? And so podcasting is the same thing. It's very hard to do day after day. It's the amount of work it takes to the amount of revenue you get in 99% of the time, it's not worth it. And so how do you figure out if it's worth it? And if it is, how do you get and become a 1% show?
Right. I saw this, a buddy of mine, he's a Navy vet from the Iraq War. He was in the Baghdad area. And he gave me like the best piece of advice one time. He was talking about comedians, and all of them say the one thing that they did to become comedians and to finally make it was they just didn't give up.
Yeah.
Like they just didn't give up. And I mean, everyone always asks me, they're like, how did you get a book? How did you start writing? And I was like, I wrote when I was reading stories to my freaking cat. And she was the only one that was going to listen to all my babbling idiocy. Yeah. And I got better. And I just kept at it. And it's like, my first book's done fine. It's won 6 literary awards, and I'm really proud of it as a New York Times bestseller now. But it's out there, and I got a book deal with it, and that was so cool. Like, that's a huge accomplishment. And Scott brings up the point that if you're a traditionally published author, you have a better chance of playing in the NFL than you do as far as getting a book deal. And I was like, dang, that's crazy. Like, as far as like the stats, it's super hard to do. And so like when I think about that, for me, everyone's like, well, how did you do it? I was like, well, I didn't quit. I was like, I just kept going. And I remember when we were putting my book proposal out there, I had 40 rejection letters. And my agent was like, she's like, I don't know. I was like, I will just keep after it. Somebody's going to want this. I just didn't lose hope. I was like, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to keep going. And I think like that's the thing, with podcasting or creative arts or anything that people want to do, especially as veterans. Like this is the part that doesn't make sense to me as far as like the vet community. Like, this doesn't make sense. You go overseas, you're told you are the hardest charging, most capable, responsible person. And you've got all these skills and you're awesome. And you're made to fight this war, and you can endure hardship and pain. And that's the message, right? And you come home and they're like, you're too weak to handle the most comfortable lifestyle. And that doesn't make sense. Yeah. I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. That's crazy talk right there. Number one. And then two, like you were also taught, like, you know, these are drilled into us. Never give up, never accept defeat, and never leave a man behind. And yet we come up, like, once we get out, like, that's the first thing we do. We go, oh, I can't get a job. Oh, I'm never going to get as a podcaster. Oh, I'm never going to write my book. And I go, like, give me the world's smileless violin, like, because like, when you take off that uniform, you shouldn't take off the values that went along with it.
Right.
Like, I never have. I teach my daughter now, like, and one of the values in our house is we don't give up, we don't accept defeat, and we don't leave our friends behind. And because of that, she's been able to thrive out of that. But that's the thing. Like, you one foot in front of the other. Like, people always ask, like, how did that dude pass, buds, or how'd they get through special forces selection? And I go, they just put one foot in front of the other. They just didn't quit. That was literally it. That's what they're looking for.
We had Navy SEAL Duke Harbin on the show back in the very, very beginning. And he's like, I was willing to die. All right. Well, there's the standard. Can you do that? Not everybody has to go that far, but he was willing to die to get through. He's like, I don't care if I get hurt. I don't care if I'm in pain. I'm going to do this, or it's going to kill me. And when you realize that's your peers, it tells you where the game is. I want to ask you one more real quick thing, and I don't want to take a whole lot of time because you and I both have other things to do. One of the skills that you have to build up, and you just kind of alluded to it, is having a big enough ass to get chewed when something doesn't go right. And in our line of work, there's a lot of risk where we might make a mistake or something may not go our way, because nothing that we do is linear. And so it's great to have a boss, and you mentioned one earlier for you, that could take the command's desire to kick you out of theater or off this camp, which has happened. All that stuff's happened to me. But if I have the right kind of boss, and they're like, his job's hard, none of you guys can do it. And if he doesn't do it, no one will do it. So I'll handle the discipline part. You guys leave me alone. Let me be a leader, and I'll see you guys later. And then they come to me like, hey, don't worry about it. Go out and go do work, right? But you need to have that big ass that can get chewed on, so that when the DCO, the boss, whoever it is screaming at you, you can sit back and go, got it, sir. Yes, here's what we're going to do. Nothing. We're going to get him back in the field. We'll tighten up his aim and get him going the right direction, but I need him to trust us. I need him to go out there and do dangerous shit that no one else can do. And if you want to kick away a guy who can do things that nobody else can do, then I'll put him on the next plane. And every single time I had a boss fight for me like that, the commander said, yeah, get him back out there. We do need him, because sometimes we make mistakes.
And that's true. Like, one of the biggest things that I'll never forget, like, my first sergeant who retired as a sergeant major, his name was Greg Shanahan. Sadly, he died of cancer, likely due to the burn pits. It was his second bout with cancer. But dude, we call that guy Superman, because he was willing to take a bullet for all of us. And when you have a leader like that leads from the front like that, who goes, okay, yeah, they did some dumb stuff. I'm gonna take the bullet for this one. His influence directly impacted me with the same way that I would go to bat for people when I was leading a nonprofit. And it was funny when they brought in this other executive director. He goes, dude, you built the A team. How'd you build the A team? Like, and I was like, I picked the people with soft skills, and I was willing to go to bat for them. It was simple as that. I was willing to just, when things got hard, I was willing to take a bullet because I saw other people do it. So you're right. Yeah,
I love it. All right, well, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I'm going to roll this credit. Stay with me. I'll be right back to you at the end. Everybody else, I will see you next time. Thank you all for listening. This was a really good episode. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated